Greetings, fellow football managers, and welcome to the wonderful and frustrating world of the misfiring striker. I need to apologize first of all to Darwin Nunez in my thumbnail. I just thought that using him and Liverpool as an example for this is really poignant given that they beat Chelsea 4-1 on Wednesday, I think it was, and Nunez hit the woodwork 4 times, which apparently is a Premier League record. To be fair, a couple of them were great saves. But what do you do in Football Manager when you have that kind of situation? I'm going to take you on a journey through a lot of the things that you can do to try and fix if you have a striker who is not performing to the kind of level that you expect him to. On the screen, you'll see Victor Osimhen, who is one of the best strikers in the world. I would argue probably the most lethal finisher that there is in Football Manager 24 at the start of the game. I have simulated a bunch of games with a slightly weird tactic to try and generate poor form from him, and you will see that at the bottom left down here, you have a form graph. He did have one game here against Crystal Palace where he scored 2 goals and therefore pushed his rating up, but he's gone through 4 other games where he hasn't scored a goal and his ratings are something like 6.4, 6.5, 6.6. That's the thing about a striker, a guy who plays exclusively up there. If he doesn't score goals or at least doesn't assist a couple of goals a game, his ratings are going to be low. That position needs goals. So immediately there you have a slight bit of a fallacy. Every striker you play up front may not actually be a goal-scoring striker, and therefore their ratings might be quite low even though they're doing the job that you want them to do. A false 9, a deep lying forward support, target forward support. Not always a goal scorer sometimes. And you might be completely happy with what they do on the field. Just like I personally, as a Liverpool fan, I'm super happy with Nunez because he's doing so much that I don't really worry whether he scores or not. He makes everybody a lot better. But the point of this video is to fix a striker and make him score goals, so let's go. I have 3 major categories for this. Number 1, I look at psychology and the mental side of things. Secondly, I look at tactics. And the third thing I do is go into training. I think the psychology is the easiest to fix. So let's actually go up here to overview and then go to his happiness tab. You get a little bit of a view here in dynamics and you can see that his morale is perfect, which is great. If you hover over this arrow, you can see all the different things that contribute to it. He is only satisfied in a couple of things. So we have an immediate idea that if he gets into trouble, we can fix those little things. Go to the happiness tab, and then we'll get a much more detailed overview. Look at this. A lot of players don't actually look at this view, but this gives you a lot of information about things you can do. Now, immediately you can see at the top left, his morale is perfect, so we don't have to fix that. One of the big things you can do if your team is struggling in general, a player is struggling, you can try and fix that morale. How do you do it? There are many, many ways. One of the easiest cheat code kind of ways, you'd probably have heard every content creator talk about this, is praising their conduct. So basically you go up here to discuss, you can go to praise player and then praise conduct. That one's a free hit. Unless they've done a Marcus Rashford and gone off to party while the rest of the team trains or something like that, the praise conduct will be a good option for you. Remember, everything in Football Manager is contextual, so if that has actually happened, if the player's done something unprofessional like that, and then you go and praise conduct, it could backfire. Otherwise, this is a free hit. You can also praise certain things. You can go into praise last game, for example, and yeah, we know he's not scoring goals, but you can say your passing was a joy to behold. Obviously, don't do this if the match rating was low, but if his match rating was 7.1, 7.2, maybe if he had an assist or something like that, you can go with your passing was a joy to behold. You can praise him for a decent match rating for you led the line beautifully, even though he doesn't score. If you say you were superb in front of goal last time out and he hasn't scored a goal for the last couple of games, he's going to think you're an idiot. Let's just try it. There we go. Dubious. And he says, I didn't think I was particularly good. Yes. Another thing you can praise is praise training and development. So if his training rating has been good, you will get a training report every week, I think. You can then look at his training. If it is over 7.5, over 8 perhaps, you can then go and try and praise his training. I would do it with an 8 or more. I wouldn't do it with a 7.5 actually. You can also criticize the player, so you can warn him. You can criticize his training. You can criticize his recent form, his last game. His conduct, again, is a risky one, but generally speaking, criticizing recent form or last game would be good. In this case, Osimhen's last game was a 6.4, so yeah, that warrants criticism. His form is a bit of a tricky one because if we go back here, his form is pulled up in terms of an average by that game over here where he scored 2. So if he has 2 more bad games, then his average form would be something like a 6.5. As you can see here, it's a 6.86. Maybe you can't see it. But I'll tell you, it is a 6.86. It's brought up by this 8.5 thanks to the brace he scored here. So form, again, I would be careful of. If this last 5 game graph is bad, then go ahead and criticize form. Now, one thing about criticism. We talked about hidden attributes, link up here. Be careful which players you criticize. Victor Osimhen, given that his personality is fairly determined, I would be slightly wary about this. First, going to coach report, take a look at what he's like. If down here at the bottom, if you get a con of he is temperamental or something like that, you want to be a little bit careful. A temperamental player will not take to criticism very well. You probably want to experiment a little and see which player responds in which kind of way. Perfectionist players could be a little bit tricky. Then again, it could work as well because they're so professional, they're so driven, they're so ambitious. They can take it logically. When they get a 6.4, it doesn't jive with their ambition rating. They want to do better. They want to play well. And therefore, criticism can go down quite well. As we go back into Victor Osimhen, we go back to the happiness thing that we're looking at. Down here at the bottom, short-term plans, long-term plans, and then at the bottom, playing pathway target. So you can actually have something like a promise system. It won't work here with Victor Osimhen because he is, as you can see just above, he's an important player. And there isn't really a pathway target for an important player. He's expecting to be playing most matches. But if the guy's more of a squad player, you can then suggest a pathway target and say, look, I'll make you an important player if you score X amount of goals in the next certain games. That will then push him to try and put the ball in the back of the net a little bit more. That's just one little trick though. I would try and focus on things like praising or warning the player. That is really one of the best ways to work the guy in a psychological sense. Try and figure out which players need an arm around the shoulder and which players respond well to criticism, and you can push them that way. However, you need to watch out that you keep an eye on his morale. You don't want to damage his morale too much. Getting it down from perfect a couple of jots is okay, especially if you've given him the right motivational kind of punch. If you've brought his morale down by criticizing, that is okay because you've put that criticism message and you will spur him to perform that way. But if his morale is kind of average, you do not want to push it into the red by criticizing. In that case, if it's just average, try and get it up into the green by something like praising conduct before you do something else. Or find another way to praise him before you then criticize him for his lack of goals. This is a very important balance to hit, irrespective of where your team is. If your complete team is red in morale, you are not going to do very well. Forget about the individual player, your team is going to struggle. Okay, the last thing I want to bring up, and I'm actually not going to put it on the screen because I don't have an example handy, is the contextual team talk. Remember that Football Manager is all about realistic expectations. Even though in your head, when you, let's say, pick Sheffield United, you want to test yourself, you want to win the league with Sheffield United, but you can't tell that to your players in that initial team talk that you'll do. Their morale is going to absolutely plummet into the red. That's going to have the wrong effect. It's cool to be ambitious and have your own personal private goals, but you sound like a fool to your players and to the press and all of that in the game if you actually say those things. So remember to stay contextual in your interactions with, number one, the players, and number two, obviously the press and so on. Think about the expectations. Think about whether you are absolutely the underdog in games. Work that into your team talks. Don't put pressure on your team to win, for example, even though they do have good pressure rating. You might find that out, but still expecting them to win a match away at Manchester City, it's just not going to happen. What you want to do is try and encourage them, fire them up in your games with your team talks. If you come away with a draw and you were expected to get battered, then that's a great performance. Praise them for that. If they don't lose too heavily, if they lose 1-0 to Manchester City away, for example, and you're playing Sheffield, you could probably praise them by saying, look, guys, that was okay. We did well. We tried. So keep morale up. And when it's in the green, then you can start using tools like criticism. Remember though, keep it contextual. Context is big in Football Manager 24. Think about that with your team talks. Think about that with your match shouts as well. Okay, finally, there is one thing, the fatigue level of the player. You can hover over this heart here when you're selecting a team. You can have a look at the fatigue down there. Fresh is the situation. I have just simulated a couple of months into September with this tactic. So most of my players are going to be fresh. However, if there's been an international tournament or something like that, then they may not be fresh. They might be struggling. If they've played a lot of football, if you're in something like December or January, a lot of your players will start to get jaded. Look out for that. If they need a rest, give them a rest. Figure out a time in your schedule where you can actually rest the player and then right-click on the player, go to training, and then go for rest. You can then rest them. Before you actually rest them, you can also speak to them about them needing a rest. That is a contextual thing that will come up when it's needed. So look out for that. it might be good to have a chat about it. Some players will not do well with the idea. In that case, don't talk to them about it. Guys like Virgil van Dijk, who are important players of the team, they know that they're the best player in the team. Look at this. They won't always take kindly to being rested, so then you just need to stealth rest him. You just need to right-click and rest him without talking to him, because otherwise he'll get a little bit upset. He will be slightly upset in the meantime at being dropped, but c'est la vie. So you can do that with the striker. Rotation is also something that you need to think about. If you do have a backup striker, for example, I have Nunez, who's basically a number 9 as well, I would just drop Osimhen for a game, play him off the bench, off you go. This will also have the effect of getting him on late in a game when the defense is tired, and that will create opportunities as well, because the striker will then be fresh going up against tired opponents, tired defenders, stuff like that. That might be a good way to get a striker back amongst the goals. And then you can start praising him for scoring goals and then get his confidence back up in terms of putting the ball in the net. That is another thing you can do. But one of the biggest things to look at when you're talking about getting a guy scoring is what is happening with the team and with the player. Okay, before we actually go into the tactical side of things, we need to figure out who exactly our striker is and what kind of profile they fit. This is an interesting discussion, especially looking at real-world football right now, because obviously Manchester City went out there and they bought Erling Haaland, who is hands down the best striker in the world. Easy peasy. But at the same time, he fits a certain profile. Let's have a look at Erling Haaland's profile. He is a physical monster. He is fast, he's agile, he can jump. He's got fantastic stamina and strength. Basically, he has everything you need in a physical sense, but he's also a lethal finisher. He has finishing of 18, composure 18, anticipation of 19, so he can read the game. He knows where the chances are going to come. His off-the-maul movement is fantastic, and he's extremely determined. He's a driven personality, so he's driven to do well. He can also take penalties. So this is a brilliant all-round goal scorer. City went out and bought Haaland, and they could kind of see where the football meta is going. And then Liverpool went out and bought Nunez. Let's have a look at Nunez. Nunez doesn't really have as much green as Haaland, but he has kind of the same profile. He has all of those physical things in place. I would expect a lot of this stuff to go way up in the next data update, or at least in FM25, because he's an absolute monster. The mentals aren't quite there. Again, anybody who watches the Premier League will have heard this refrain of Darwin Nunez can't finish. To be fair, he's a very good technical finisher, and I think that's reflected here in the stats. He starts the game with a 15, if I'm not wrong, maybe even a 14, but I've really focused on his training. His anticipation and composure, which really elite strikers need, isn't quite there as well. So he's not a superstar in this sense, definitely not in the mental sense on Football Manager. But in the physical sense, he does have all that you need. He is very, very fast. He's strong and he can jump as well. So he has that complete forward kind of profile that Erling Haaland does as well in a physical kind of sense. Now, I don't know if you know this, but Manchester United also tried to get Haaland, but they put in an offer and they got him. The guy agreed a deal. He came in. He arrived in Manchester with short hair and a slightly pockmarked face. They were wondering what the hell happened. Okay, Haaland could have gone through some stuff over the summer, but then they looked at his passport and they realized that one of the Glazers made a typo and they'd actually gotten Højlund. What's interesting here though is Højlund fits also this same kind of profile. He is also extremely fast. Look at that pace of 18. His jumping reach is 15. His strength is 17. He fits that profile. Is he a little bit overrated? Maybe. But he's a fantastic young player with that same striker profile as Haaland and Nunez. What are these guys not? Let's take a look at a different kind of player. Let's take a look at a Harry Kane. Now, this is a very different profile. As you can see, he doesn't really have the same pace. Granted, he's 32, but he never really had pace. He has 14, which is very serviceable, but his acceleration, his agility is not quite there. So he's not going to be running around in behind like some of those other strikers can do. He doesn't really offer that. What he offers is a very different kind of technical profile. His vision, his passing, his technique is up at 17. He's got long shots of 15, first touch of 15. Dribbling is a bit low at 14, let's say, but he has fantastic decision making. Intelligence, footballing intelligence is way up there. Harry Kane is almost a taller Rooney for me. Speaking of tall though, his jumping reach is 13. So what kind of goals is he going to score? Not the same goals as Haaland, as Højlund, and perhaps as Nunez or Osimhen either. If you think back a little bit, Harry Kane's profile is kind of similar to guys like Fabio Quagliarella for Italy. He was a fantastic technical striker with even higher long shots, first touch and all of that kind of thing. Didn't have much in the physicals. fairly tall, so he could score a header or two, but he was all technical quality. So one of the biggest things is to know your striker and know what kind of goals they're going to score. Haaland, Højlund, Nunez, these guys are going to be monsters in and around the box. They're going to be good on the counter. They can win headers in the box. They can kind of do it all in a sense from a finishing perspective. Harry Kane, not really. You're looking at him being more the creative kind of player. Even a deep lying forward support might be good with him. As you can see, the game thinks so. He is 5-star in deep lying forward support. Does that waste his finishing 19, composure 18, decisions 18? No, not at all. Because he is more suitable as the second striker, where you've got another striker going in front, occupying the defenders, and then he can find a yard of space in there and then use that finishing skill when the ball comes to him. So then your tactical design needs to incorporate the fact that you've got a guy who's hanging around the penalty spot rather than at one of the posts to actually score goals. So this is a really interesting meta shift because strikers like Aguero, Saviola, those smaller, faster strikers seem to be kind of on the way out, and it's just these bigger powerhouses who can do everything in the box who are becoming in fashion. So understand who your strikers are. It doesn't mean that you can't score goals with a smaller striker. It just means that you'll have to adjust your approach a little bit to create for that kind of player. Let's park that point there as we go a little bit further forward. We need to look at playing style as well. How exactly are you playing, and does that work for your striker? If you're playing on the counter, for example, a Harry Kane is more of a creator on the counter. You want him as your target man. You want him receiving the ball and then spraying it to a runner, something like a winger on attack, an inside forward attack, an advanced forward attack in front of him who he can play in or play beyond, and then he can make a run into the box to get on the end of it. That's kind of how you want to score goals with a Harry Kane if you are playing on the counter. Do you want to play Harry Kane as an advanced forward and then take counterattack? No, because he doesn't have the pace to actually run in behind. Can you do that with a Darwin Nunez? Absolutely. He has acceleration 17, pace 17, off the ball movement 17. Work rate's up there as well, 16. So yeah, he can absolutely play in a counter-attacking system. Can Victor Osimhen do that? Even better. So if you have a super slow striker, you need to watch out where he is in your counter-attacking system, for example. Another thing to look at is where your press is. If you're a high press system, your strikers will only maybe get a yard in front of their player before they have to try and make a finish. Whereas if you're playing in a low block counter-attacking system, you can really start to use their pace because they will be needing to cover a lot more ground and they can really make up the yards on defenders there. Again though, if you have somebody like Harry Kane and you want to play a low block, then you need a fast winger or something like that, where Harry Kane can play the ball in beyond, the winger can get on the ball, run up the flank, and then put the cross in once Kane is in the box. That kind of thinking might be useful when you're designing your attacking style. Something like work on the box is cool too. Do you want to play it all the time? Absolutely not. If you're playing it at a lower level, it just won't work. If you have players like Alexis McAllister, look at that. Vision, first touch, passing, technique, decision-making, composure. He has all of the things which allow you to play something like a work into box system, and then your strikers will profit. He maybe doesn't work in an agility or balance sense because those aren't very high. You would ideally want them a little bit higher to play a work ball into box system because he wants to be on the ball a lot more just outside the box to play the ball through. Still, it can work based on his technical and mental quality. Another thing you need to think about is your tempo. Now, right now I have it set right in the middle. This is standard on a balance setup, so this is dead in the middle. If your striker is not scoring and you're playing something like a high tempo game, if you're playing positive, for example, the tempo goes up to slightly higher. Let's just change it and show you what happens. Here we go, positive, and we'll shift it up there. See the tempo, it's gone to slightly higher. Higher tempo means that your player is just going to be trying to play more urgently. That also counts for finishing. Essentially, he's going to try and take the shot on a little bit quicker than he would if you were unbalanced and had tempo completely standard. So that might help your striker as well, just bringing the tempo a tad bit further down, letting him take a moment to set himself before he shoots. That can really have a good effect on your striker. However, that is a team play kind of thing, so you need to be a little bit careful with it. Good players can play sort of a shorter passing game at a higher tempo, no problem at all. That is what positive basically does. It increases the tempo a little bit, but it is predicated on being the better team. That includes having a technically good finisher and a mentally good finisher. Somebody like Victor Osimhen can play at a high tempo with a short passing positive kind of game. he can absolutely do it. Can Darwin Núñez do it? I don't know. Because of that low composure, the slightly low anticipation, low decision making, this is a bit of a problem if you're playing a higher tempo, shorter passing system where you're the better team. If you're playing really intricate football, this really doesn't work with this Darwin Núñez on the screen. Real life Darwin Núñez, different story. This Darwin Núñez in Football Manager 24, you will struggle just a little bit. The next thing you want to think about in terms of tactics is what is your general style? We've talked about tempo and things like that, counters, high press, low press. That is one aspect of style. But another aspect of style is, are you playing like Pep Guardiola? Are you playing like Jurgen Klopp? The difference there is positional play versus rotational triangles. How can I simplify that? Positional play is basically winger on this side, winger on this side, for example, and these wingers dominate their area and that area there. Basically, the Manchester City style is we have the most money in the world because we are owned by a state, and therefore we are also probably legally stronger than the Premier League, and therefore we're not going to get punished for these 115 charges, so we're just going to have the best players in the world to dominate their space. And why not? So Haaland dominates the central space. They have guys like Jeremy Doku who they think can dominate the wide spaces, and they try and win those one-on-one duels in those set spaces. If we look at Jurgen Klopp football on the other hand, or rather Pep Lijnders football, because it's Pep Lijnders who really wrote the book on rotational triangles, you have players moving in lateral areas. For example, we would switch this winger to an inside forward so that he moves this way. We would then have this central midfielder as something like a Mezzala, who would move outside. So you would have that crisscross kind of thing. So instead of the Mezzala being here now, he'll be here, and then Diaz would be where the central midfielder would be expected to get to. In that sense, you also have a fullback coming up there. You'd probably want him as more of a complete wingback support to try and engineer that, where he has the freedom to go in and out as well. And you'd have those triangles building up between players on the different sides. You'd have this guy coming in as well, something like an inside forward support. And then you would have maybe a wingback attack or something like that to design that triangle where he goes in, he goes out, and then you'd have this guy as something like a Carrilero. It's just tactical talk. That's not the tactic I would really set up. It's not a 4-2-3-1 anyway. It's more like this, a 4-3-3. And then the triangles get set up with these three players on this side, these three players on this side, the central players going out, the outside players coming in, and so on and so forth. That's more of the Klopp or Lijnders kind of football. Then there's relational football, which is quite difficult to implement in Football Manager 24. I hope that's something that they will make a little bit easier as we go forward. And then there's numbers in the box kind of football, where you're just trying to get lots of players into the box. That works really well because it causes lots of chaos. The defenders have much more to do, and it can be very, very effective. Something like this, for example, could be absolutely devastating, because you're putting these two guys in the box, and then depending on where the ball is, one of these flankers is in the box as well. That's three players. The Mezzala could be in the box as well. So you're really crowding the box and creating chaos in there. For me, that's not the most beautiful kind of goal, but it's very, very effective. And the general point there is, based on your situation, the output you get from your strikers will differ. If you are a League One team who's kind of at the bottom end of the League One, can you play Guardiola football? I don't know. Do you have the Erling Haaland of your level? You probably could get him if you loan him. But if you're playing with a standard League One kind of team, it might actually be quite difficult to have those one-on-one domination kind of positions. And then when you get promoted, you're definitely not going to have the best team in the league. Again, you can loan a few players in and you can make some smart transfers, but you're not going to, as a newly promoted team, have the best players in the league where you can have them dominating those kind of positions. So if you do want to play that football, but it might actually be difficult unless you have the best player in that position. Or, of course, his supply lines are fantastic. And that's the next point I want to get to here. It is supply lines. Have you designed supply lines for the striker? If we look at it right now, the supply lines are not very brilliant. They're also slightly one-dimensional. Why do I say that? The inside forwards here are instructed to cross less often. That is happening on both sides. The attacking inside forward is also an extremely attack-focused kind of player. He is going to be trying to score goals as much as he can. His secondary duty is to create. His primary duty is to score goals. With the left foot, so like a Mo Salah will always go here and then maybe cut back and try and shoot into the far post. IFA is very much a Mo Salah of a couple of years ago kind of role. If you think back, he was the primary goal scorer in the Liverpool team, and he wasn't really passing and crossing that much. There was a little bit of friction between him and Sadio Mane. because of that maybe slight lack of connection between the two of them, but that was Salah's role in the team. His role in the team now is a little bit different. He's more of a winger support or an inside winger support, something like that. So he's connecting a lot more. He's building the supply line a little bit better. I was talking about Højlund a little bit. I think Højlund's a really great example of this. He's a good striker, but he doesn't have a supply line. I'm going to try and put a couple of images on the screen now. This image shows you a fullback on the ball, and what he does from this point is he plays the ball into Højlund's feet. He doesn't try and whip it in so that Højlund can take a one-touch shot or something like that. The delivery from the fullback doesn't really give him any chance to do anything. In the end, what he does is he controls it, shifts his back to goal, lays it off to his inside forward attack, who is Rashford, who scores the goal. Fine. That's a great move. But the thing there is you're playing something like a target forward and an inside forward attack, and the inside forward attack is the primary goal scorer in that situation. The supply line for Højlund was not there in that particular situation. Here's another image of a winger on the ball. This guy is a right-footed right winger, but look where he's aiming. He's not even aiming when he gets on the ball towards the opposite corner flag. He's coming right inside into the number 10 kind of position and then playing the ball there. So that's a very interesting setup. Again, as a striker who is 6'2" or 6'3", good in the air, you would be very, very frustrated at the fact that you don't actually have a winger who is getting the ball wide and then trying to cross it into your head, because you're giving yourself a 50-50 of beating any defender. Garnacho, to be fair, looks like a winger, but he does want to score goals, so he points himself in field a lot. Anthony, we've talked about him before. He allegedly saves his aggression for his private life rather than the football pitch, so less said about that, the better. Rashford, on the other side, is just focused on scoring goals. He's not a very assist-oriented player at all, so there is not much service for Højlund. Here's how they do create service. The move we talked about earlier where Garnacho goes infield, Rashford actually this time holds the ball up. He waits for the overlapping fullback. What you can do to generate this kind of move that Manchester United did is to go into team instructions and say overlap left. That will then encourage Rashford to hold the ball up and bring his mentality slightly down. It will also bring Shaw's mentality a little bit further up. So it would encourage that kind of move. So if you're frustrated that your IFA is not holding up the ball in situations for your wingback support, it's because he won't, unless you manipulate it somehow. And Look for Overlap can kind of design that move for you. Because a wingback support normally won't run in behind as aggressively as Shaw did in that situation. If you want that aggressive run in behind, if you want to have that move happening more and more, you're going to switch it up to look something like this, where you have a wingback attack and an inside forward support. The inside forward support is still very aggressive, but the wingback attack will at least show up for the overlap a lot more, and he will then get to the byline, which is what Shaw did. Granted, Shaw got a little bit lucky. The ball deflects, and then Højlund just commits. He gets a toe on it. He scores the goal. That's a 50-50 goal. It doesn't always work because the touch that the defender gets could put the ball out for a corner kick, whatever. The point is that it's very important to get a player to the byline somehow if you want to generate goals in that way. It doesn't matter what real profile that your forward is, but they need to be on an attack duty to score that kind of goal, generally. Especially if it's a winger attack or something like that who creates the byline goal, then it's a good idea to have an attack duty forward to get that goal at the near post. But if it's an overlapping fullback or something like that, you could get a goal even from a supporting player, even from an attacking midfielder. I've seen that kind of goal from this position as an attack midfielder support. It can happen because you've got lots of players in the box and then making runs and things like that. No worries. So don't sleep on something like a wingback attack to get to the byline and generate chances like that. You can generate those chances with a big player, small player, doesn't really matter. Another thing there is low crosses. Low crosses can be a really good instruction to get the most out of your smaller players, especially if you don't have somebody like an Osimhen, a Haaland, a Nunez or someone like that who actually can win a header in the box. You probably want to have low crosses as your crossing setup. So you can do that by going to in possession and choosing final third. You can then select low crosses. I personally don't do it as a philosophy because I do have enough tall players getting forward. But generally speaking, if you don't have any tall players getting into the box in open play, then go for low crosses. One thing to think about again, you have the byline crossing options, but then you also need deep crossing options to vary things up a little bit. Those are very, very good for your tall players, especially to score goals. The byline crosses, it's basically bundle the ball in from right in front of the goal. So anybody can score that as long as they have good off the ball movement and determination and things like this. But if you have a big guy and you want to score goals, remember that phase 2 kind of attack. Again, if we have an inside forward attack over here, your phase 1 attack is going to be these two players on the left hand side. these two joining up and getting into the attack, this wingback would probably be on support in that kind of situation, which then means that once this attack is broken down, you then have the wingback coming up and offering your phase 2. Sometimes you might have a setup like this where the fullback on the other side is on attacking. So your phase 1, he will be helping out, sometimes phase 2, and then your wingback support can offer a phase 2 or a phase 3. Basically, these crosses will come in from a little bit deeper, so then your big players can profit. If you have low crosses, then they'll find people in the box if they can. Your attacking midfielder, for example, can benefit as well from that kind of thing. He might be able to also go back to the guys waiting on the edge of the box and score goals like that. So having players getting forward and offering supply lines of different kinds is very, very vital for your forwards to score goals and create different kinds of threats that your forward can score off. A winger support is also a really good attacking option because the winger support will just try and get a yard. Once he beats his man, he gets a yard, he'll whip the ball in. So your forward will then have a direct chance to score off that. Doesn't matter how big he is again, because it could be a cross in behind since it's coming in so early. A winger attack, on the other hand, will try and get to the byline. He'll drive, he'll come in a little bit. He's good for the cutback and for that low cross. He also wants to score a couple of goals, so watch out for that. Winger attack isn't purely a assisting kind of player. If your formation looks a little bit like this, do not set this guy to, for example, deep lying playmaker or deep lying playmaker support and expect them to get lots of assists. The deep lying playmaker is not really an assisting role. He's more of a facilitator. He'll play this guy in, and then this guy will try and create the assist. That's the kind of pattern you need to look for with something like a deep lying playmaker. They're just not close enough to the striker to create that many assists. It could happen on a counterattack. It could happen, for example, if you're playing a low block where the deep lying playmaker just puts one in behind early. But if you're the better team, or if you're trying to get the ball forward and then create goals with intricate passing, the DLP is not going to be your assist creator. If you want him to be an assist creator, switch him to something like an advanced playmaker. Even just that little move, that little role change, that is enough to actually get him operating in these kinds of areas and then looking for those through balls in behind. He'll also play through balls in this way and create goals there. But your AP will be a creator for your forward. So if you reckon that your forward doesn't score any goals, but then you've only got a deep lying playmaker, you might think about getting an attacking playmaker, an advanced playmaker in there, either in support or even in attack, and he'll start creating goals. A roaming playmaker can also do the job of assisting the forward. So in terms of creating for the forwards, you do want guys like wingers. Your inside forwards are not so good. Maybe a support would be okay because he'll play a lot of through balls. Inside forward attack can also do little cutbacks and things like that, but he's primarily a goal scorer. Wingers are good for your forward. And that is something that Højlund would get on his knees today and tell you, please play a proper winger because then I will be a 25 goal a season player. And that's true. He absolutely will. I've got a lot of respect for the guy. One of his best attributes is his voice. Brilliant voice. Dulcet tones. In a lot of tactics as well, you'll see that a lot of players use inverted wingbacks and inverted fullbacks and things like that. Remember that you're not going to get much width through those guys. You're not really going to get those second phase, third phase kind of crosses. You'll get them much later in a move because the IFB will in fact get out wide now and then, but not as much as, for example, a fullback support. The difference between a fullback support and an IFB could be huge just to get your forward scoring a little bit more. So just have a think and see if you're a little bit too defensive, if you could be a little bit more expansive in a way. Do you really need those interesting roles like IFBs and IWBs and things like that? Are you going to be actually better served with a fullback support just to get your striker scoring a little bit more, providing those crosses from wide areas a little bit quicker than an IFB might do? Think about it. It could work. Another interesting thing here is the high press. Remember that a high press can lead to goals. At the same time, switching to a mid block or a low block later on in a game can be super, super useful, especially getting goals out of a complete forward like this or a fast forward, because you can just play the ball into space over the top, something like this. So you can switch, pass into space. If you want, you can get your tempo and your directness a little bit higher. You can then shift your block a little bit further down, something like a low block if you want, or lower like this. Take out short distribution. Or you can go to something like a mid block and then have a standard or even a higher defensive line. I would go for standard personally. And then you'll have a little bit more space in behind where you can play the ball into, and then your strikers can score. So that's what I meant earlier about putting your striker on the bench who's not scoring. Bring him on at 65 when you're 2-0 up, if you're doing well, and then he'll score goals that way. Again, even at 0-0 would be fine. 1-0, perfect. because the other team is going to come out at you. You can also do this in a tactical sense. If you have fast forwards, if they're small and fast, for example, you might just as a tactical setup want to draw the other team out, bring your block down a little bit, and play in behind. Okay, so that's tactics, and this video has gone on really, really long. I haven't even got to training. Let's just do that really, really quickly. There are three main things that I want to touch on in terms of training. Number one is individual training. If you have a younger player who has a gap between their CA and their PA, again, we've talked about that in attributes. Basically, they have room to improve. You want to absolutely direct their improvement. For example, somebody like Nicky Grundy, who is a regen for me, I'm putting him as a complete wingback with an additional focus of strength. I've identified this guy as an absolute monster in the future. So I want to actually make him kind of my new Joe Gomez. And in my opinion, he has enough PA that I can spread it around like this. I'm spreading it very, very far. If I wanted to make him a new Jamie Carragher, for example, I would change this up a little bit. I would train him as something like a ball-playing defender, defend. Look at that. And I would maybe take out the additional focus. So now I've actually changed up what attributes he's going to focus on so I can define his future. Since we're talking about forwards though, if we just go up into the forward line and click somebody like a Victor Osimhen, you can see how narrow this training setup is. This is advanced forward attack and he's only training dribbling, finishing and first touch along with a bit of passing and technique. If I just want this guy to become a goal scorer out and out, I can switch him to something like Poacher, and you can see it contracts even more. He stops training his passing. He focuses on those finishing attributes. So this is something that you can do if you think your player has some room to improve, and you just want to try and improve him over a year or two, again though generally for young players. Another thing you can do is go to the mentoring tab, set up some mentoring systems. As you can see, I need to pay a little bit of attention here. But the point is you're trying to get an influential player, somebody who's a team leader or something like that, but also has good personality. And this is important, extremely good hidden attributes, things like consistency and big matches, which you can see for an older player when you check their coach report. You want a player who ticks all of those boxes, and then you want to make them a mentoring group leader. Have 2, maximum 3 players in each mentoring group if you can, otherwise the effect will be spread out a little bit too much, and put your younger players in there. What I was getting to though is the fact that you need to try and tutor those hidden attributes. Try and identify the hidden attributes of your older player, and then you can try and inculcate them into the younger players. You can see I've got Finlay Jeff, who is a wonder kid. He's another one who I've identified as having really, really high potential, and I want to try and train him. I need to shout out a viewer here called Jeffrey Minucci, because he pointed out in one of the comments something I neglected to mention in my attribute video, that youngsters have certain hidden attributes which are not shown in the coach report until they hit a certain age. So I might not be able to find out what Finlay Jeff's big matches and consistency is like, other than by observing him and seeing how he plays. But I can definitely do that from Mo Salah, and if I know that Mo Salah has really high consistency, really high important matches, I don't really lose anything by having Jeff tutored by Salah, because even if Jeff has the same things, they're not going to go down dramatically. Unless, for example, Jeff has a 20 in those and Salah has a 17, then that would be getting into a risky area, but c'est la vie. You can definitely improve things like big matches, consistency, pressure, temperament, controversy. All of those things will make your player a better goal scorer. Things like consistency and big matches, you can't go wrong. Again, though, these 2 last tips have generally been for younger players. Let's look at something that we can work on with every single player. The last thing I want to cover in this video, thank you for sticking around so long, by the way, is player traits. This is a little box over here, but it is visible when you click it. A lot of players have these things called player traits. Mo Salah, as you can see, has one very related to finishing. It is places shots. This one here likes to try to beat offside trap, runs with ball often, cuts inside from right wing. All of these do affect goal scoring because they're kind of movement related. Places shots is a finishing related one. Look at what player traits your players have. These can affect what they do, whether they're good or bad. Now, honestly, you don't really need to worry about a player like Mo Salah not scoring goals unless you have an awful tactic, because he will perform unless really your tactic is bad. But other players are not so lucky. Let's look at somebody like Darwin Nunez. Where is he? He has only the trait of knocks ball past opponent. This suits his acceleration, not really his balance, but his agility and acceleration are okay for knocks ball past opponent. So this is a move he will try to do. The problem with a team like Liverpool is you're playing so high, he may not always have the space to do this. Still, it's a good one, and it can free a yard for a shot. Personally, I would try and apply maybe one more finishing trait. You can do this by clicking player traits and then going to discuss new traits. Pick one of your coaches. I would go for either a technical or attacking coach and go to finishing training. Finishing technical looks good. Then you can pick what kind of traits you want. Remember, Darwin Núñez had kind of low decision making and composure and stuff like that if we just look at his sheet once more. So this kind of means that placing shots is not going to be the best thing, because to place a shot, you need good finishing, you need good technique, and you need things like composure. His low decision making is why I would actually train a player trait, because then he doesn't need to make a decision. He can just fall back on what he knows. A player with really high decisions and really high finishing is probably going to decide for himself what the right finish is. And in that situation, I would not train a finishing trait on that player, because they're smart enough to make a decision on the spot if they have good composure as well. A player with lower decisions and lower composure though, especially lower decisions, will probably need a player trait. I neglected to do this before, but it's still a good idea to do this. Going to something like finishing and now having a look. Now, what would I consider on a player of the profile of Darwin Núñez? Personally, I would go for something like first-time shots, because his technique is good enough and his finishing attribute is pretty high. So first-time shots make sense to me. Also, when I observe games on the field, I see that he takes a touch, and then by the time he's going for the shot, he has been closed down. So the first time shots might actually alleviate that problem. So first time shots is a good one. Also, blasting the ball into the back of the net is probably a good one too. Just because it removes that composure element. I'm just wanting him to get his head down and smash it. And when I clicked it, my coach, Barry Lutis, who is a pretty good coach, that's some decent attributes over there, he says it is a suitable approach. And he gives you some information. It's a trait that suits players for whom composure is not a strength. So there you go. That shows me that blasting the ball was a good choice with a player with low composure. So once you've profiled your player, you can take a few actions like that. You can give them something like a trait. As you can see, he's going to start training it now. Now it comes down to his professionalism and determination and things like that to see whether he'll actually get that trait. If you ever want an update on that, you can have a look at his training report and then you'll see. I know there's lots of different finishing traits you can have, and there's so many different types of strikers you've got. Just try and make a contextual, rational kind of decision like I did just now. Low composure, okay, get your head down and hit it. Slightly lower decision making, again, is a good one, because then you're giving somebody something to fall back on. You're giving him that stock option. The stock concept is a really good one in high level sports, especially because in a high pressure situation when you don't have time to think, when you're getting a little bit nervy, it's good to have one technical thing that you can just do, which you're good at doing. That's kind of a stock thing. In cricket, you look at it as a stock delivery. In golf, it could be a stock shot, and so on. So if you give him a player trait that he can do, especially with low decisions and low composure, stuff like that, giving him that stock option is a really good idea. If they have really high decision making, really high finishing, okay, let him be. Don't have a trait. If they've got really high finishing and maybe slightly lower decisions, something like places shots would be good with high composure. Rounding the keeper is really good for players with high agility, because they can move very, very quickly on their feet. High dribbling as well. If you've got dribbling 18 and agility 18 or something, rounding keeper would be good, because it means that with their touch, they'll make an angle for themselves and then have a higher chance of a finish because they've got more goal to aim at. So that could be something. Think about what your player is, pay a lot of attention to the player and what their attributes are, and then choose your finishing move that you want to train. Cool, this has been super long, so I'm going to end it here. Just a quick recap. We're looking at psychology. First of all, we were looking at the player's morale. Get it up however you can. Then you can choose whether to praise or warn them. That can then motivate them to score more as well, based on the situation, based on their player. You can look at things like promises in terms of playing time and contracts as well. You can make a little promise based on performance. That's something you can experiment with. Make sure that they're not fatigued or jaded. Think about contextual talks, team talks, shouts, all of that stuff. Keep context in mind, how good you are, what your expectations are in the game rather than as a player, and then use your interactions that way. From a tactical standpoint, understand who your striker is, profile them properly, and then make sure your tactics and your play style match that player. If you're playing a low block counter-attacking kind of system and you don't have fast wingers and a fast striker, there's just no point. So think about things like, are you playing a counter system? Are you playing high press or low press? Think about your work ball into box. Do you have midfielders who can actually sneak the ball into the box for your striker to score or not? Think about your tempo. If your tempo is too high, your striker might be struggling to actually score goals because they're rushing everything. Think about your playing style. If you're playing positional play as a lower league team, or if the striker is just not good enough for that style and he's completely isolated in the box, then if he's not Erling Haaland, he's not going to score. He's just got too many defenders sitting on top of him. Get more players into the box. Have some rotation. Have some variation. Do that kind of thing with your tactics. Think about your supply lines, which roles are assisting you to score goals. We're going to click back into transfers to show you that. Think about players like your wingback attack rather than support as being a good byline creator. Think about, again, are your players assisting from the byline? Are they assisting with through balls from here? If you are playing a DLP, don't expect him to assist. Change him to an AP if you want him to assist your striker. Think about a fullback support rather than an inverted fullback defend if you actually want a couple of crosses into the box. Remember that you can modify all roles with instructions. A winger support, for example, you can actually give him take more risks. So if you want to do that thing with Salah, make him a winger support. You can put take more risks on so you can actually take advantage of his vision and passing. Look at that. Passing 15, vision 17. If Salah is my right winger in this particular tactic, I would want him to try and play some through balls that way. So give him that instruction with a PI if you want to. And finally, look at training as well. Think about those player traits. Try and engineer different traits based on your player. And if it's a young player, remember to mentor them. Remember to train them and develop those attributes. Cool. Thank you so much for watching. If you've got anything else to add, if you've got any strategies that you use to fix your misfiring striker, let me know down below. Cheers.